Okay, so we're diving into Revelation today.
Right.
The book of Revelation,
Yeah.
four horsemen, the dragon, the whole shebang, all that kind of imagery.
Yeah.
Um, and we're looking at a book by E.W. Bullinger. It's called The Apocalypse or The Day of the Lord.
Okay.
And I have to admit, like, my first instinct with Revelation is always like, oh boy, here we go. End of the world prophecies.
Yeah, yeah. It's common perception. I think the imagery is so vivid and so often unsettling to people
Yeah.
that it lends itself to that kind of interpretation.
Totally. But Bullinger throws a real curveball right at the beginning.
Okay.
He basically comes out and says, what if I told you that the apocalypse is not about the church?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a bold claim,
Yeah.
and one that I think for a lot of people comes a bit of a surprise.
That's like the opposite of what you think you're gonna
Yeah.
hear.
Right.
So like he presents his case like a detective, right?
Sure.
He points to how Christ is described in the book.
Yeah.
Titles like First and Last, Living One, King of Kings.
Right.
And he's saying these aren't just, nice titles, that they specifically point to an earthly rule, a dominion over the nations. And that's not how we usually think of the church.
Exactly. It's emphasizing a more earthly, almost political dimension to it, something that's tied to God's covenant with Israel specifically. And it's not to say that the church is completely, removed from it,
Right.
but it's understanding its place within a larger kind of divinely ordained plan.
So almost like two separate but related
That's a great way to put it.
plans or revelations.
Yeah, he very much sees it as there's one revelation which is given to the church, and that's, you find that in the epistles. And then there's another revelation which is given specifically for Israel, and that's what the apocalypse is.
Okay.
And so those two revelations, while they're connected,
Yeah.
they have distinct purposes.
Right. You can't just like lump them all together.
Yeah.
You have to sort of say, well, hold on. What's the context here? Who is this addressed to?
Context is key.
Yeah.
And I think Bullinger would argue that trying to interpret Revelation solely through the lens of the church without understanding its unique focus on Israel
Right.
can lead to all sorts of misunderstandings and misinterpretations.
So we're already shifting our perspective a little bit.
Yeah.
Like we have to hit the reset button.
Right.
Okay. I'm intrigued.
Okay.
But let's dig into some specifics here. So one of the things he does is he looks at the Greek words for salvation.
Uh-huh.
He talks about soteria and soterian.
Right.
Can you unpack that a little bit?
Yeah, that's a really interesting example. So soteria generally refers to what we would call spiritual salvation. So that idea of, being saved by grace through faith in Christ,
Yeah.
soterian, has a slightly different nuance to it. It carries with it this idea of deliverance, often from a physical danger or physical oppression.
Okay, so more like an earthly deliverance.
Exactly.
All right.
And what Bullinger notices is that, particularly in Revelation, the word that's being used predominantly is soterian, particularly when it's talking about Israel's ultimate deliverance from tribulation.
Interesting. So he's making that distinction between the spiritual salvation, which is offered to all, and then this kind of more specific historical deliverance that's promised to Israel.
Exactly. And it's that distinction which really forms the foundation for his entire interpretation of the book.
Okay, I think I'm starting to see how he kind of sets up his argument.
Okay.
But I got to say, like, Revelation still feels like a puzzle sometimes. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You got all these weird creatures and symbols and these crazy events. It's a lot to take in.
Right. It can be overwhelming.
Yeah.
Yes.
So is there something like a key that can help us understand it all?
That's where Bullinger's analysis of the structure of Revelation, I think, is really helpful.
Okay.
He sees a very particular order within the book,
Okay.
a structure that acts as a kind of roadmap or a guide.
A roadmap.
Yeah, so he divides the book into 7 distinct sections
Okay.
with a central pivotal point kind of right at the heart of it.
Okay.
And these sections alternate back and forth between scenes in heaven and scenes on earth.
So it's like we're looking at two different realities
Yes,
at the same time.
Yeah, and it's not random.
Right.
He's not just like, oh, I'll throw a vision of heaven in here and now back to earth.
Right.
He thinks this back and forth is actually really crucial to understanding the message.
Okay.
He sees it as reflecting a divine structure, a deliberate plan that unfolds over the course of the book.
So there's a method to the madness.
Exactly, like a perfectly crafted play
Okay.
with different acts that all flow together.
Okay.
And each scene, whether it's a glimpse into the throne room of heaven or a depiction of upheaval on earth,
Right.
plays a specific part in this grand kind of cosmic drama.
I like that. So we're looking at it like a play. It makes it feel a little less overwhelming.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have our roadmap.
Okay.
We have our play, but there's still a lot to unpack here.
Sure.
So let's talk about those 7 churches that are mentioned at the beginning. Now, Bullinger doesn't interpret those literally, does he?
No, he doesn't. He sees the 7 churches as representing specific periods in Israel's history.
Okay.
So each church, with its own, commendations and warnings, becomes a microcosm
Right.
of a particular era.
So it's like each church is like a snapshot,
That's a
different part of Israel's story.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So, for example, he connects the Church of Ephesus
Okay.
to that period of, first love immediately after the Exodus.
Right.
You can almost feel that energy and devotion of the Israelites as they kind of embark on this new chapter with God.
Right, totally.
But then he draws a parallel between the church at Smyrna and Israel's years wandering in the wilderness.
Yeah.
It's highlighting those times when faith is tested,
Right.
when doubt and hardship can creep in.
And he even connects the 10 days of tribulation that are mentioned in the letter to Smyrna to the 40 years of wandering, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
He finds these really subtle but really powerful echoes between the church's experiences and key moments in Israel's journey. Take the church at Philadelphia, for instance.
Okay.
He sees that as representing a time of restoration and hope,
Right.
similar to the period of Judah's kings when the temple was rebuilt
Right.
and there was this renewed sense of God's favor.
Okay, so let's say I'm really interested in the Roman Empire,
Okay.
like all the political intrigue and power struggles. Which church would resonate with that?
Then you'd be interested in the church at Thyatira,
Okay.
because Bullinger links that church to the period of Israel's kings, specifically the reigns of Ahab and Jezebel.
Okay.
And it was an era marked by idolatry, by moral decline,
Right.
the worship of Baal, this powerful deity who really challenged the authority of God.
So he's saying that there are these parallels between the spiritual struggles of that church and what was happening in the Roman Empire at the time.
It's not just some kind of obscure Bible history lesson.
Right.
He sees these letters as warnings from history,
Wow.
cautionary tales about the consequences of straying from God's path.
Right.
And remember, for Bullinger, this is all relevant
Right.
to Israel as they face God's judgment in the day of the Lord.
So he's drawing a line from the past through these churches to what he sees as the future.
Yeah, he's saying these patterns
Wow.
repeat themselves.
That's a really interesting way to look at it. So we've got our roadmap, we've got these historical parallels, but Revelation is also known for these really bizarre, often terrifying images.
Right.
What about things like the 2 witnesses?
Yeah.
Or the woman and the dragon? Does Bullinger have specific interpretations for those as well? It's funny. We always approach Revelation like it's this big, scary thing. But the way Bullinger lays it out,
Yeah.
it's almost hopeful.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I mean, there's certainly judgment depicted in Revelation, but it's not arbitrary. It's part of this larger story that ultimately points towards redemption, renewal.
It's like he's saying, yes, there's judgment, but it's not the end of the story.
Exactly.
There's something else.
And I think that's an encouraging message for anyone, regardless of your theological background.
Totally. So speaking of Revelation, we can't forget some of the more, enigmatic figures we meet in the book, like the 2 witnesses, for example.
Sure.
Who are they? Are they just any 2 prophets?
No, Bullinger connects them very specifically to 2 figures from the Old Testament, Zerubbabel and Joshua.
Okay.
And these weren't just any prophets. Zerubbabel was instrumental in leading the Israelites back to Jerusalem after the Babylonian exile.
Oh, okay.
And Joshua, the high priest, was the one who cleansed and rededicated the temple.
So again, we're seeing that theme of restoration
Exactly.
coming back from exile.
They represent hope, spiritual leadership, the reestablishment of God's covenant with his people.
So even in the midst of all this tribulation, there's this glimmer of hope.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That even when things seem their bleakest, God raises up individuals to guide his people towards that restoration.
I like that. What about that image of the woman and the dragon?
Okay.
That's a big one.
Yeah, it's one of the most vivid images in Revelation.
It is. How does he interpret that?
Well, Bullinger sees it as more than just a kind of a symbolic battle between good and evil.
Okay.
He actually draws a direct parallel to Pharaoh's attempt to wipe out the Israelites in the book of Exodus,
Oh, wow.
particularly the decree to kill all the male infants.
So, again, that echoes throughout.
Exactly. It's echoing these primal fears of persecution and genocide that have haunted Israel throughout their history.
Right.
The dragon, representing those forces opposed to God, seeks to destroy God's people, just as Pharaoh did.
Wow.
But the woman, representing God's faithful remnant, is preserved and protected.
So there's always that remnant
There's always a remnant.
that survives.
Yeah, and it's a reminder that throughout history, God has always preserved a faithful remnant, even in the face of overwhelming opposition.
I like that. And then, of course, we have to talk about 666.
Right, the number of the beast.
It's like the most infamous part.
It is. It's become almost a cliche, hasn't it?
It really has, yeah.
But
Like, what does it mean?
well, Bullinger, again, he digs into the significance of numbers in the ancient world.
Okay.
And he argues that 666 wasn't just some random scary number.
Okay.
He connects it to ancient pagan practices, specifically those that challenged God's authority
Okay.
and lured people away from true worship.
So, again, that connection to the past and
Yeah.
how these things, they reappear.
Exactly. He's highlighting these recurring patterns, these echoes from the past that can help us understand the present and perhaps even prepare for the future.
Okay. That's really interesting.
And you know, one of the things that Bullinger does that I think is so fascinating is he connects Revelation back to the very beginning,
Okay.
to Genesis.
Wow. Okay.
He argues that Revelation isn't just about the end of the world, as we might think of it.
Okay.
It's about restoration,
Okay.
a return to Eden, a new heaven, and a new earth.
Wow. So it's not just an apocalypse,
Right. It's the culmination.
but it's a new beginning.
Yes. It's the culmination of God's plan, or restoration of all things.
That's amazing. That really changes how you read the book, doesn't it?
It does. It really does.
It's not just, oh no, fire and brimstone. It's
Right.
like, okay, but there's something else there. Wow. Well, this has been incredible. Thank you so much for taking this deep dive with me
It's been my pleasure.
into E.W. Bullinger's The Apocalypse, or The Day of the Lord. And for all of you listening, whether you agree with all of Bullinger's interpretations, you have to admit he makes you think.
Absolutely.
He forces us to re-examine some of our assumptions about this book
Yeah.
and really wrestle with its message. So keep exploring, keep asking questions, and until next time, thanks for listening.